the day about this. It's really a topic that I am, somewhat passionate about. I'm passionate about documenting requirements pretty thoroughly, and getting on people if they don't. So I look forward to this conversation and seeing where it goes, and we'll get started. I have a little presentation here that I will start us out with. So let's see here.
Can you give us a little introduction, and can Efua give us a little introduction? I know you, but not everybody else does.
Yes, we will. Go right into it. Thank you, Steve. So, introduction about me. My name is Melissa Daley. I've been in IT for over 20 years. I think I stopped counting. Mostly as a systems engineer, requirements analyst. I've done coding, but really on my own, and also for small companies and so forth, but not for any big firms that I've worked for. I've come from a Big Four background, and now I'm the owner of Orca Intelligence. And I'll pass it over to Efua.
Hi, everyone. My name is Efua Opoku. Pleasure to be here. I'm excited to be facilitating with Melissa. So I actually came into the IT space after years of being in public health as a public health professional. And on my first IT project, because of my health management and policy background, I was a huge asset to the team. At the time, we were working on an innovation project, a couple of projects with CMMI. So once I got into the space, it just grabbed my attention and interest, and I've stuck with it, primarily playing roles of business analysis and sticking with that, and then a bit of like Scrum Master and Kanban work as well. So looking forward to this conversation and chat. And thank you, Steve, as well, for welcoming me.
Awesome. So we have a really interactive presentation. I'm not going to sit here and just give you information. Please ask questions. So if anyone's looking in the chat, I usually don't look at the chat as we're talking. So if anyone wants to kind of just unmute, or Steve can just go ahead and kind of moderate the questions as we go through. But pretty much we're going to be talking about behavioral driven development tonight. And what I want to start out with first is like, what is BDD? I want to go over a really high level version of what BDD is. Many of you are probably familiar with the fact that behavioral driven development is, a new way or an evolved way of documenting requirements. And really what it is another way to document scenarios, right? So there's tools that are aligned with it. And we'll go over that tonight. And mostly everyone is familiar with the fact that behavioral driven development is associated with jerking code. And we'll talk about jerking code tonight as well. But the mere fact of behavioral driven development is just focusing on the behavior. I mean, just simplify it. Don't get too complicated. It's what you're supposed to do in requirements management anyway. If you're gathering requirements and you are trying to document, you need to do it based on the behavior. Why? Because software is based on behavior, right? Like software, the way that you develop is based on the behavior of the system. So what action are you going to take on the data? The root of any system is the data that you're going to be taking the action on, right? So that's really all behavioral driven development is. That's what any type of requirements management should be regardless. So even if you go back to use cases or scenarios or cases or whatever they were in the 70s, 90s, they're all the same thing. It's just right now we've just evolved to business or behavioral driven development using a specific way or syntax around that. It's definitely an option to communicate requirements. If you are familiar with communicating requirements through tools like Jira or Rally or version 1 or any of those tools, they normally do not have BDD associated with them. So you have to use other tools to go along with it. So what's an example? So here you'll see an example of behavioral driven development. I'm going to try to move this out the way. I have my little thingy in the way. So again, for those who are, who need the closed caption, I automatically put my PowerPoint in closed caption just in case that Zoom doesn't have it. So that's why you'll see it scrolling down at the bottom. So going back to our example, what we have here is the simplest example that I always use is manage contacts. It's a no-brainer, right? So the idea is that if you're doing an application around manage contacts, what you want to do is you want to pick out what the feature is. We'll go into some techniques around how to, decompose and really identify what your feature should be. But the idea here is that your feature would be create a contact. Pretty simple, right? You just want to create a contact. A rule that's associated with the particular, item or feature here would be user is an admin. So basically the idea is that in order to create a contact, the user should be an admin. The scenario, add a contact is one of the scenarios. So you want to go ahead and add a contact. You have your given, when, then, and your and statements. So your and statements can be associated with a when statement or a then statement. So for this particular scenario, given, the user selects the option to add a contact. So if you're familiar with other types of ways to document requirements, given is pretty much a precondition. What is the precondition for your specific scenario? So you start out with given. So given, the user selects the option to add a contact. So they're selecting the contact. When the system displays the ability to enter in the contact information. So this is the response from a system when the user selects the option to add. Then once this response is done or presented to the user, then the user enters in the contact information, right? So it's kind of like telling a story, right? The scenario is a story. Any scenario within behavior-driven development is basically a story. So now we want to try to translate the story into code somehow. So really, BDD is somewhat kind of like pseudocode, if you guys are familiar with that term. When you get to the then statements, if you're doing this based off of, a UI interaction, you want to highlight the data sets that are associated with it. So I've highlighted data sets here, but in some tools, you'll be able to list out the data sets and basically trace them to these particular statements within BDD. Once you've here, of course, in this particular scenario, after the then you're able to, the user selects the option to save, and the system validates the information entered, and the system saves the information, right? So it's basically a sequence of information and events that occur in the system, right? Pretty simple. Any questions?
You mentioned that this is like a feature level capture, possibly, but is it something to where this could be broken down even further of any
Well,
sort?
this particular one is actually a scenario that's associated with the feature create contacts, right? So
Okay.
there will be other scenarios in here. So this one right now is this add contact. There may be another one that's import a contact or add contacts, right? So underneath that feature, you may have multiple ways of adding a contact.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions? All
What's
right.
a good rule of thumb for all those ands? Like, when is it too many?
Oh, good question. I wonder if I should talk about that now or when I get to techniques.
Okay,
Well,
we can
I'll
wait till
start on it
technique.
now. I'll start on it now, and then I will elaborate on it when we get to techniques. So let's say if you're here on a scenario and you're like, oh, add a contact, right? And you say here, and the system audits the contact added, right? So let's say you want to audit it, meaning that you're entering the information, excuse me, and then the contact or the person that entered in the information, now you want the system to be able to audit that information that was just added. That is, if many of you know, that's a whole nother process. It's a whole nother thing that you have to do, another item that you have to develop, it's basically another scenario, right? Because it's not necessarily the behavior of the user. In this case, it's now the behavior of the system. So whenever and I'm going to get really like grammatically technical here. Whenever you hear another like verb and noun congregation together that's outside of the scope of this particular scenario, then that most likely means that you need to go on to another scenario. So again, the idea is here, we're only dealing with the user, what the user is doing with the system. So for this particular one, the user is adding a contact. Now, if we are going to the system being able to do something like auditing, that's a whole nother scenario because it's the system. It's not the user that's auditing, it's the actual scenario. Does that make sense? Awesome. Any other questions?
Yes, one. Does that mean then if you're trying to make this a smaller story, you might do something like take out system validates the information entered, and it would just, they would select save and it would save whatever it is?
You could, right?
Okay.
Because the idea is that that particular component of save could be used over and over again. So the idea is that you want to, if you think like the way that I think about this is like factorials, right? Like if you're thinking about like doing and not necessarily factorials, I take that back, is fractions, right? So if you're doing like a fraction, you have to keep breaking things down. So like 32/4, right? You have to keep breaking that down into its lowest common denominator. You look at that, you basically look at the feature or look at the scenario to get it down to its lowest common denominator. And if it's not there, like what you're referencing, is that you can take it out and that save, it would be a part of a lowest common denominator because that can be used over and over again throughout the system. Does that make
Cool.
sense?
Thanks. Yeah.
Any other questions? All
And
right.
maybe this is a little early, but when these things are being broken down, they can probably be a little technical. Is it usually like a product owner, a business analyst, customers, team, testers? Who starts engaging in these?
It's supposed to be everybody. Yeah, it's supposed to be everybody. I have some I have some reservations around that. The reason for that is because when you get into a collaborative environment, and we'll talk about this a little bit, Efua is going to point this out, but when you get to a collaborative environment, this depends on, the situation. So I'll let Efua touch on that a little bit more and jump in where needed.
All right, awesome. So I'm just going to go over a couple of the pros and cons of BDD. Of course, this is not an exhaustive list, but we just wanted to highlight a couple of things for you all to kind of mull over, think about, and for us to have a conversation about. So on the pro side, one of the main things that is benefit is having a living document. So basically, due to the nature of the BDD process, as a team, you would already have a built-in documentation, which can be updated as needed throughout the process. Another benefit would be the refactoring code. So it's less risky with BDD because you have the automated test placed, from the start. And so your tests can be run more frequently. Next would be test reuse and targeted testing. So if you use the right approach and techniques, tools, which Melissa will get into, it's easier to reuse your test steps in different scenarios. So basically, like once you've automated a step, you can use it as applicable for another like automated scenario. And then traceability, of course, any test developed from the use of BDD, you should be able to map it back to your executable specifications. So between the test and requirements, the traceability is built in from the start. And then on the con side, even though on the pro side, communication is good, but it can also be an issue, especially challenges between whoever is writing the features and the person who's developing the automation code. And just in general, having larger teams or teams of people, lots of conversation and opinions talking about actually getting to the meat of stuff. The given when then scenarios, it requires that you have a really good understanding of the structure to be able to structure it pretty well. Maintaining documentation, while we love documentation, the maintenance can also be potentially overwhelming for folks depending on how the team is set up. Having the right test up front, requiring like that you have an actual dedicated team working with the client may not always be feasible, because BDD is something that you would choose based on your situation. It's not something that we would necessarily prescribe for everyone, but it's something that you would do based on the situation of the project you're on. Learning a new language, which is not a natural language, is also something that is a con. And then the last 2 points, pretty much with these two, they're not traceable with BDD. So I'm gonna pause here for questions that we could answer, or thoughts that you have on these couple of points that we brought up.
I have a small success story related to this, which was a pretty cool situation, which is I was at a biotech pharma last, and the FDA, which I came from banking before this, so it was quite surprising to me, but the FDA is very scary. You don't really have a lot of transparency on how they approve things and like what happens. So when you make a technology tool that is going to possibly calculate risk related to a clinical trial or something like that, these guys were really afraid of, not getting approved and doing things in an agile manner. So we did Gherkin, and we basically used these scenarios of everything that we promised to the FDA that the customer would be able to do and see, and then actually turned over the automated testing and the scripts to them to prove that we made what we said we were going to make. And they thought it was very interesting, and it cut down on a lot of documentation, and we did get approval for that first stage. So I just want to say this works, and it also eliminated probably 100 pages of documentation of just trying to get people to press keys. They can automatically see that the tests work.
Wow, that's impressive. That's amazing. Thank you, Samantha.
Quick question about the non-functional requirements. Can you please bring some examples of all those non-functional requirements associated with this actually BDD?
Sure. Yeah. So like, if you're thinking, so I'll use Samantha's example.
Yeah.
So one of the things could be a NIST security requirement. I'm sure FDA, has to have, some type of NIST security requirement, especially going through a FedRAMP, right? So if you don't have NIST security requirements in your tool set, then there's no traceability, right? So it's really kind of identifying those specific non-functional requirements like performance.
P testing, security,
exactly,
operations. Yes.
Yes. Yep.
So sub questions, more detailed drill down on this specific question. So when we're talking about NFRs, do we put them under the given when then and acceptance criteria, or should we bring them?
You could. I wouldn't. And the reason why I say that is going back to the common denominator, is that they are their own common denominators, and you just want to be able to associate with them, right? So, because then you'll, like, let's say if a NIST requirements changes, like NIST AC-01 changes, now you're going to have to go through each given when then statement to update it, right?
So it could be part of the user story body?
Yeah, it could be part of the user story, or you could find another way to trace it. It could be a link, right? You can trace it to, you just need to find another way to trace it. So like in some of the tools that we'll go over, they don't have this particular capability, right? You can make another scenario that says, kick off NIST 800 AC 22, right? Or something like that. So you can find creative ways to do it, but it's not a standard like, oh, we're going to tag this as a non-functional requirement. The standards are just the scenario, the rules, and the data set.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions?
I have a question. You guys mentioned that there's some scenarios where this works well and some where it doesn't. Can you give us examples of some profiles where this works really well and where this may not be valuable or as valuable?
Let's see. It depends. It really depends on the team,
Okay.
right? So if the team and the organization is ready to kind of take this on and they're prepared, then it works well. But if the team isn't, then it doesn't work well, right? It's all about the people. It's all about people, process, technology, right? So you have to think about the people first and identify whether or not the people are comfortable enough to utilize it. And if they are, go forward, my child, right? And use it. But if they aren't, then you really have to assess your environment. And I think Samantha gave a good example of assessing her environment and seeing whether or not this worked. And it worked for them.
We also used it in trading at the hedge fund that I was at for like operations. So it's like giving a trader wants to be able to trade an equity in Hong Kong. Can they do this? So it's a lot of like changing where the trader is sitting and where they're going to be doing something so that you can do all that automated testing and see where stuff breaks. So if there's a lot of like repeat transactions, but you have like different users and then different kind of outcomes and you can like choose your own adventure, those things are really cool to kind of set up and automate.
Cool.
That's
Any
awesome.
other questions? All righty. Okay, so another simpler example. Now, everyone will like to associate BDD with jerking code, right? But it doesn't really necessarily have to be. Like, it's literally just that if you're not using a tool, right? You can use other tools to kind of get you to the same end result. The main focus is to be feature driven, to be behavioral driven. That is the main focus. So here's a simpler way. If your organization is not ready for the language shift and learning something new, then you could just list them out. Literally, all I did was I just changed all these from given, when, then, and to just 1 through 6. That's it. And the reason why I say this is because this is what was done before jerking came, right? You just kind of go through 1 through 6. And it's pretty much it's the same thing. Now, the difference is if you have a tool, then you're going to want to be able to utilize the tool's syntax. So it's very important to understand what your environment is willing to do. Are you willing to, get into the tool and understand the syntax so that you can generate the automated test scripts, like with your fitness scripts and so on and so forth? Then using the syntax is best. But if you don't have those tools, you can still do this either with doing the given, then, or given, when, then, or you can do this by just listing out what the different steps are if you're comfortable in doing that. And you can just use whatever tool, like for example, if you're in Jira and you just want to use this in Jira and you want to just list everything out, you can just use the list feature in Jira to just make sure this gets automatically listed out in a numerical order. Any questions?
I have a question from the chat.
Sure.
So if someone is new and just getting going through the requirements, maybe in a Word document, how could they start doing or writing in BDD format? Would that be kind of like a Three Amigos where they would work with, analysts, QA, and team? Or is it kind of like an individual just kind of does it in the corner and then presents it out?
No, they can do it with each other, with everybody. It's Three Amigos.
Okay.
Again, depends on your environment.
True.
Right? Your environment may be conducive to Three Amigos. Your environment may not be. So it depends on, you may be in a small organization where you may not have Three Amigos. You may have 2. You may have, whatever it is. And so you may have to figure out what's best for you in that situation. So if you have the ideal situation where we have your tester, your developer, and so forth, you can start with Three Amigos. But then if you get onto a larger team where you're having a developer, a tester, a security architect, a data architect, an enterprise architect, a solution, you know what I mean? Like when you have all these people, you really have to make a decision on, is it a Three Amigos meeting or is it a 6? Is this the siete?
Yeah.
amigos meeting. You know what I mean? So you really have to really figure out what's best.
Okay.
Question. When we add actually the flavors to this, how about if I have on-site and offshore teams as well? Maybe it's actually company and partner, or other type of engagement. How would be the scenario?
So basically, if you have an offshore, like, so there may be a time difference. Again, that going back to your team structure, right? For me, in the examples that I have, I've automated a lot of this process for myself. So me writing requirements is it's basically a no-brainer. Most systems have the same requirements over and over again, especially if you're in a federal government. The only difference is their data. So if you're offshore, you can probably generate a lot of the requirements for them and try to have a discussion or record a discussion, right? And then have them provide their feedback. So really, this depends on what the team dynamic is. The mere fact that this is BDD, it should not change the way your team communicates, right? Like, because you selected a specific requirements management and communication method, the way your team communicates shouldn't impact that, right? You should be able to communicate with your team regardless of the technique that you're using for requirement solicitation. Because every team, if you're using BDD or if you're using, TDD or ATDD, right? Like if you're using acceptance test driven or test driven, whatever you're doing, or design driven, all these drivens that have popped up. Regardless of which one you're doing, you still are going to need a 3 amigos meeting, or in some cases a siete. I can't remember my Spanish. Sorry.
So I have a quick one. You were talking about those other driven development, and I'm looking at this, and when you started the given when, I do a lot of acceptance criteria driven development, and it seems very similar because for me, yes. I coach product owners to put in all of these the scenarios that you want. Here are the different preconditions, and I tell them that I don't care. I mean, it doesn't matter if you say given these preconditions, right? So it's the same.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So
exactly,
this makes a lot of sense to me.
Yes, it is. It's the only difference is that you're just using a different. You're adding the syntax because it makes it easier to automate later. Now, if you're thinking about the scenarios from just a linear standpoint, like for example, this particular scenario, add contact. I'm just doing add contact here, but the idea that I associate this with other scenarios, it's a permutation, right? It's going to be a permutation when I start testing. And so, when we were doing manual testing, we permutated the scenarios in order to get all of the different types of testing combinations for us to test with, right? So now the systems are now just permutating that for us. So when you get into systems like your fitness or your JBeehive or Beehive, something, whatever it is called, I'll show you what that's called. But and Cucumber and all these other applications, they're permutating the scenarios in order to automatically test them. And so it's the same thing with a user story or a use case or whatever. You want to have your common denominator scenario, and then you want to be able to associate them with all the other scenarios that are associated with them so that you can permutate the different types of scenario combinations when you're testing. And that's all that automated testing does. So that's the same exact thing as we did when we were doing manual testing. So it's no different.
Right. So that would be different. That would include different validations that would be needed, right? So you would have an item that would be, given the, address 1 is empty.
Correct. Yes.
So you need to account for all the different scenarios depending on what you're looking at.
Correct. That's right. Yep. So basically it's an alternate flows. Yep. Another question?
Sorry, if you finish, I can ask
No,
later.
I was done.
Okay. When you say automated test, are you referring to only Selenium tests or something also other tests?
No, there's others like Selenium pretty much does the same thing, but if you use Selenium with Cucumber, right? Because Cucumber is going to be your BDD environment. Selenium is going to be your automated test environment. Selenium is going to permutate Cucumber. Cucumber can also do, it does test-driven development as well as behavioral-driven development. So if my memory serves me correctly, I believe that you can do some of the automated testing in Cucumber as well. But with Cucumber and Selenium, they both kind of cover the gamut of requirements and automated testing.
Are there any other automated tests besides Selenium tests in terms of when we do BDD?
Fitness.
What language is that?
I only know that you can do jerking code in Fitness.
Okay.
I don't know
Fitness.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Fitness is like I've used Fitness, or I've seen Fitness used Fitness in different environments, mostly not in high secure environments. Because if I can remember, I think Fitness is open source. So if you're in like an environment like some FDA environments or, DOD environments or some HHS environments, you may not be able to use Fitness. But if you're in an environment like Comcast, like I've seen Fitness used a lot in Comcast, right? Fitness is used a lot we've used it if we don't have to be in a government site with like GSA, right? GSA is pretty lax in the area. But most government organizations are going to use Selenium because it's a lot more secure.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
Melissa, do you see this also as a way to shrink the amount of documentation?
No.
Okay.
A system is a system. It just depends on the size of the system, right? You still need requirements regardless. It's not necessarily about, oh, I don't need as much. The scenarios are going to be the same scenarios, right? If I'm managing contacts in an Android environment and an Apple environment, they're the same software. This is the same types of applications and the same functionality. They're going to need the same documentation if you're going to build them, right? It's just like a car. Your car spec, just because the cars are now like a Tesla versus a Ford Focus, you still need the same documentation, right?
Good point.
Any other questions?
So is this example on the screen an example of a user story, which is using BDD?
Well, it's an example of a user story, yes, but it's not using what people have interpreted as BDD. So it's not using the given, when, then. The first example was the given, when, then. This is just an example if your team does not have, or what I want to say, if your team has not been trained on BDD as of yet, then just use the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the sequencing list of what action should be taken in the system. It's the same thing. The focus of behavioral driven development is to focus on the behavior of the user and the system. That's it. You can use, the jerking code, and you can use that. And that can assist immensely, right? But if your team is not there, you can just make a list.
So is this used at the top of the hierarchy, if you'd like to call it that, or can it be used at the bottommost level? That is, when I say top, I mean, epic and then feature and then.
Yeah, so if you see this is manage contacts. The feature is create contacts. So you would have other features in this, right? So if you use CRUD, create, read, update, delete, this is just create within this feature manage contact. And then this is the scenario added contact. We could have other scenarios here, which would be import contact, add multiple contacts, add an invalid contact, add multiple invalid you know, like, so there could be all these different types of scenarios in here. And that's associated with this feature. So scenario feature, and then this would be the epic.
And when you start getting into what I've noticed is if you start getting into those scenarios for a feature and it starts getting super big, that's when you like start looking at, did you include, are some of these things that you're putting in here, some of these behaviors like import contacts, is that actually, should that be its own feature? Because that has
Exactly.
its own
Correct.
set of scenarios.
Yep.
And when you get into, this is a really, I use this technique to help with story splitting.
Yes, correct. Yep. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about in techniques, but you just answered it. Any other questions?
I love this.
Good, 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 good. Any other questions?
Hey, I have a question. So
Yeah.
for the working, is the, for example, for using the Cucumber system or whatever, is it like, do it have to be like an automated testing, or can it be like manual if you're using the
It can be manual. I mean, you know, if you want to do the automated testing, you would just select the button, right? But it can be, you can manually enter this information into Cucumber. The good thing about it, if you're doing it in Cucumber or any of the comparable systems, is that this area, so this given, when you tag something as given when then, it's reusable. So you can use it other places as well.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? This is good, guys.
Question, probably you already answered this. So if you're already using Jira, and I've never really worked with BDD before, so it would be then a manual input. So the scenario would now be the story function, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is what, this is why I brought up this example, because if you're not using any of the tools, then it doesn't matter whether or not you're using, you know, Jerkin code or not. You can just use a list.
Got it. Right. Makes sense. Yeah.
And just number one would, number one would always be your given statement, your precondition, right? So it kind of alleviates having to write given all the time. You can just be in Jira and just do your bullet pointed list.
Right. Yeah. Makes sense.
Melissa?
Yes.
Have you had a chance to use XRay plugin to read? So you familiar with XRay as a plugin to Jira?
No.
It will actually read the Gherkin. And,
oh, nice.
And with the right integrations, generate the tests in Cucumber.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Very, yeah.
Oh, thank you for that. That's really good.
What was that plugin again?
It's just called XRay, XRAY.
That's good to know. That's because I just asked because my team started using BDD and we are just using it on the manual side now. Like we're just using it to kind of break down features in Epic, and then just to kind of get a clear communication and understanding of what of that Epic. But we just started using XRay, and it's kind of new to the company where we're trying to go automated mixing with our testing. And so that's really good to know, to kind of know like it can read the
yeah.
scenario.
You just have to make sure your DevOps team is helping you link those tools together for your pipeline.
Nice.
And I would prototype it just to test it before you get going too heavy.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Sure.
To piggyback off that question with Jira and all that, I know we talked about earlier kind of using acceptance criteria or BDD. Is there a scenario where it makes sense to use both?
It depends on how you're doing your acceptance criteria. I've been on teams who don't really use their acceptance criteria as requirements, right? They'll use their acceptance criteria as just, you know, plain like one or two sentences of this is what I want to accept as a product owner. So it's not like a, so, and then in that case, you should use both. Yeah.
In an environment that they don't use Gherkin and they don't use automated plugin into their user stories and tooling. So is this a good recommendation? They use given when then as the guideline for the acceptance criteria, or just using the plain acceptance criteria, bypass the given when then? What's the recommendation?
Depends on your team. It's all about the team. If the team is ready, then they should move forward. But it's literally about the team and the technique. It's T&T, team and technique. If you don't have the technique to decompose, like to do a functional decomposition, then you're not going to have you're not going to be prepared to do Gherkin and to do BDD. So if you're not even doing any type of functional decomposition, then this isn't going to work. Right? So it depends on your team and your technique. So really do an assessment around that, because it's not a blanket statement that's like, yes, I would choose BDD over, TDD or ATTD, right? It can't be a blanket statement. It's all about the people, process, and the technology.
I see that. Thank you.
Yep.
Hi, I have a question. When is it okay to break up a user story? What is the signs? Is there a specific criteria, or it depends on the user story? Let's say it has like technical specs. Yep, thank you.
Yeah, so I'll get into that. Steve, I don't know if we'll have time later, hopefully, but I would like to get into the tool a little bit so we can talk about how to break this down. I think I showed Steve a tool that we're working on to kind of break down to answer your question. But really, it's about the methodology that you're using. The methodology I use to break down user stories is verb and noun agreement. Sorry about my phone in the background. I'm not near it, so it's going to ring for a little bit. But the verb and noun agreement is really important. So when you have a verb like create, read, update, delete, import, they're either, depending on how big they are, they're either a new feature or they're a new user story. It's literally just that simple. Right. And then it depends on the other one, what I was saying before is that also depends on like the noun that's associated with it. So if you have the subject, it's all about like a sentence structure. So if the subject, the user of that particular user story changes and the verb changes, then that's a whole nother user story or a whole nother scenario. So that's how you just have to do a functional decomposition and keep breaking things down until its lowest common denominator. Hopefully that answers the question.
I like that. And how did you put that verb and noun? What did you say?
So it's a verb and noun agreement and association. So, if you have create, read, update, delete, I've come up with another type of process called Caves D, because with create, read, update, delete, it was really presented in when we only had a DB2 system, right? So we had like an IBM type of database, and because it only had that type of those 4 different types of verbs to go along with it, that's where the CRUD process came from. But then for me, in my environments that I work in, I've added Caves D, which is create, audit, view, edit, search, and delete. And the reason for that is because now we're auditing more, we're searching more, and we're deleting, right? So the idea is to at least start out with those. Like your system should be at least able to start out with those six, I think, and move from there.
One other technique we apply for very similar actually project, that verb and noun agreement and the whiteboarding. One of the technique we use for decomposition, when we had and in the user stories, there is a sign that the developer can break down the actually user story, because most of the developers and the scrum masters, they didn't have agreement. Hey, the developer said that I cannot break it down. And when we read the user story, if there are any and, it seems that you can break it down to the next level of the coding.
Yeah.
with the
And I think,
whiteboarding.
yeah, and I think, you know, it makes it with BDD and the syntax that is associated with it at this point, that makes it a little confusing, right? Because I agree with you that when you get to an and, that should definitely be a new user story, but just be mindful that because the jerkin code has and in it does not mean that that's a new user story. It's just the and in the sequence of the steps, right? So it's kind of, so make sure that, you know, you're aware of when to use it appropriately.
Good point.
Yeah. So the tools here, we have Cucumber, EasyB, a list of them here, Fitness, like I said, Bean Spec, Spec Flow. So these are just a list of tools that can be used for behavioral driven development. And then we have the 5 whys. Efua, you want to talk about this a little bit?
Yeah, sure will. So the 5 whys is something that is used like in BDD to allow you to understand the like root of a particular problem you're trying to solve. So if you're familiar with it, it begins with stating the problem, and then you ask why the problem is happening, and then you continue to ask why for each reason, you know, stated previously about the problem. And you'd only stop asking once asking the question why does not yield any more useful responses. So just a basic example would be like, the problem is like, I ran through a red light, right? Why? Because I was late for work. Why is that? I woke up late. Why? Because my alarm clock broke. Why? Because I didn't check if it worked. Why? Because I forgot to check the night before, you know? So it just helps the team sort of like get to the heart of the matter, the root of, you know, the problem by just sort of asking why continuously until you narrate it down to what the problem is, and then kind of figure out what the counter to that would be. So any questions, thoughts, or examples of how this might have helped you all, if you're familiar with it?
Question? Yeah.
Straightforward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we talked a lot about techniques. You know, the main technique, like I said, is I always look from a verb noun agreement, using CRUD first, and then navigating from there, doing a functional decomposition diagram, you know, starting out with my epics. Of course, my epics start out with verbs and nouns, of course, and then same thing with features. Now breaking it down, verb and noun, and then the scenario, verb and noun, and so forth, and going from there. Any questions before we move forward? All right, so we want to do an audience example. Does anybody want to do an example of what's something that they're working on now? Oh, before we get there. Anyone? 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 No?
Mike, you had some interesting thoughts and comments. Would you like to share?
I see the chat is just, I'm the bottom of the food chain at work who was told to build test framework.
I think Mike had an example about.
Oh, he said he would love to, but he has technical difficulties.
Technical issues, okay.
Mm-hmm.
I have an example.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay, thank you. So I'm just in a group with some people. We just met on Facebook, and we are all aspiring business analysts. And something that we're working on is trying to create like a maybe I'll just like a meeting app let's just say a matching app.
Okay.
Yeah. So something that we have decided to do is to try to create something that mimics the functionality of, let's say, Google Maps where you basically search by, let's say if it's restaurants, you can just click on that restaurant and then click further into it to get more detail into that restaurant to see if it's something I may want to, go to or buy food from. So in this case, it would be, let's say, like a matching app based on skills. Somebody that, let's say a mentor, somebody that has skills that I want to learn more of because I'm an aspiring business analyst. So maybe I would say, maybe I would want to meet somebody that could tell me more about, let's say BDD, right? And then let's say if you were a mentor, then you could sign on to this app and then say, I can teach people about, let's say BDD or some whatever form of technology. And then when I go onto the app, I should then be able to see maybe a list of different skills, let's say under Agile for lack of whatever, let's say under Agile, and then maybe I'll go to requirements. When I click on requirements, I'll see different types of requirements, and then I'll click on BDD. When I click on BDD, I'll see your picture, Melissa, and then, or maybe, different people that all teach BDD, and then their ratings, sort of like in just in apps. And then let's say you're the 5-star rating, I'll click into you to read more about your profile. And if I decide that I like you, then I'm gonna heart you. Then I'll go and keep looking at others, and then maybe I'll heart 2 more. And then at the end of the day, I'm going to, everything that I've hearted is gonna go into a different folder. And then when I'm done with my searching, I want to go to my hearted folders or my favorites folder, and then make my decision on who is that person I am going to initiate a request with. Sorry, that was long with it, but.
Nope, it's fine. So I'm doing, what I was talking about before, which is pretty much identifying using kind of a CRUD approach and a little bit of search. I didn't use my KZ approach just to kind of keep it short. But the idea is to have, basically what I'm hearing is you want to create a skills map. You want to view it because, right, you have to view it. You may have to view profiles, but at least you're going to view the map of the people that are in your area. You may want to update that map. Maybe the system's updating it with new people, deleting it or searching it, right? You may not want to delete, so we can take that off. We can maybe do something like, view profile of analyst, right? So something like that. So we'll have that. So this is, going through a functional decomposition. So we have create. So if I'm going to look at create, I may start out with add skills map. And so the idea for adding a skills map, maybe I can change this color a little bit so that it looks a little different. So the idea of this particular adding this skills map is, if we do jerking code with it, given the user selects the option to add a skills map. That may not be the best one, but when the user the system displays a skills map, then the user is able to enter their information. So, right, so this is totally wrong, right? But if we have, at least if we start out with this, we can have a Three Amigos meeting to really talk about what we're creating, right? So, and the reason why I say this is totally wrong is because if I'm thinking of this from a user perspective, is that I'm not going to really be creating a skills map. The system will be creating a skills map based off of the information that's added to it. So maybe I'm creating a profile instead, right? So
Okay, true.
we may want to change this from, create skills map, because this is given the system has one or more profiles, right? Because that's how you're going to have to create a skills map. You need one or more profiles. When the user selects the map, the list of analyst profiles are displayed, something like that. Wait, is that right?
Selects a skill, right?
Thank you. When the user selects. So we're having a Three Amigos meeting. You can jump in at any time. The user selects a skill. Given the system has one or more profiles, when the user selects a skill, then the map, is that right? Then the map displays the list of profiles based on the skills selected. And it could be something else. And the map displays something else. But again, it goes back to, I could have wrote this in a different way. I could have wrote it with, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or whatever. But the main idea, the point that we want to make is that if you start out with your technique, you can get to your scenario.
Okay, thank you.
I think that's a good example. All right, so now I know I don't know, what time are we at? I missed the time.
6:30.
6:30.
Okay. So what I'm thinking we can do is do a mentee and do the questions. We were going to do a breakout, but I think we have too many people to do breakouts. So I'm going to put this list here, and Efua is going to, guide us through the questions. Oh, whoops. Let me open it first, actually. And then we can do it.
Few little technical issues. And also, if anyone would like to provide any comments, we have another mentee here. Let me just share my screen real quick while you're getting that, Melissa.
Okay.
And if anyone would like to, add comments for Melissa and Efua, go to menti.com, type in this code, and you can enter information into the word cloud, and I'm sharing the wrong screen, aren't I? Or am I sharing the right screen? Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah,
Do you guys see the word cloud, the Menti word cloud?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay. We use WebEx at my new office, and it's driving me crazy. It's all over the place. So.
Sorry.
And I will post this as well, but I know people like to see the results, and we'll check out the results. Later, there we go. Somebody's typing, so that's good to see. All right, Melissa, are you ready?
Yeah, I dropped the link in the chat, and I think Melissa did as well.
Yeah, so I'm going to share my screen again. And then while Efua is going through the questions with you guys, we'll show what those are. I'll show what they are here, and then she'll navigate us through, I believe. Let's see. Having my own difficulty.
I'm in, and my name is Tiger Baby.
Aha.
Fun.
Okay, give me 1 second. Let me make sure I got this going here. Okay, so everybody will have 1 minute to answer.
That was fast.
Simple enough, simple enough.
Yeah, so this is something that Melissa had touched on earlier in terms of the techniques. And there are different techniques, of course, for BDD, but this is the one she touched on. So that would be the right answer, functional decomposition versus the others. I don't know if they, yeah. Do we do questions after, or just go through this and see if there are any questions afterwards?
Yeah, you guys have any questions? That was pretty easy. Okay. Keep having issues here. Let's see.
Hey, Melissa.
Yes.
You were looking to help somebody get on this path. What would be a good, I guess, starting place to sort of get into this?
When we're done with this, I can show you.
Awesome.
Yeah. Give me a second. I'm not sure how to get to my next one. Okay. All right, so you guys should be able to answer the next one.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
Ah, good choice.
Great choice. Yeah.
Why does create come first? I guess would be a good question.
Because you can't do the other things. And
yeah.
It's the natural order.
Yeah, you can't update or delete if you don't have anything there.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so what is the natural sequence after create?
Oh,
What
I'll
would
go
come?
through that.
Okay, thank you.
I thought this one was asking why to your manager.
We had fun creating these. Okay.
I've done this before, and these are tricky, you know, because it's the end of the day. I'm like, I don't know, second myself a little bit.
We had in quizzes or tests, I'm like, oh, first thought, no, probably wrong, and then spaz out. Okay.
Looky there. Awesome. Any questions?
Yeah, okay, so this was a guess for me, but I guessed right, I guess. But so BDD is focused on the end user, even though we are really describing the behavior of the system. Okay.
So it's the behaviors come from people. So
Yeah.
you're focusing on the end use, you know what I mean?
Okay. Okay.
And then, test driven is focused on like, how was this, did you solve that behavior? Did you solve what the users were supposed to, how they were supposed to interact with the system?
Oh, okay. So with test driven, would it be like making sure that you get a certain outcome?
Yes, it's making sure that you get a certain outcome, that the system works based on what the users want. Like, and again, it depends on the environment. So for example, in Comcast, you're really focused on, making sure all of the different types of search scenarios are presented. And what I mean by that is like, if you guys have your Comcast remotes or searching or anything like that, you want to make sure that all of those searches come back. So that's how they use test. They use a TDD environment. So your test-driven environment, you want to make sure that everything that we're trying to get back from the system works. They're not really focused on the end user. They're focused on making sure that data comes back correctly.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
So would you have a combination then of user stories which are BDD as well as TDD?
I wouldn't recommend it.
So say, for example, you've got a couple of stories that are UI dependent. So, okay, those would be candidates for BDD. But if there are validation stories, then they would be candidates for TDD, I'm thinking.
Not necessarily, right? Because even if you have validation stories, it's based on how, the behavior, what is the user going to see or do, and how are they going to behave when there's a validation, right? So for example, like this X here, right? Many of us have been, our behavior towards an X is like, oh, stop, we are not going to do anything, right? We should, it's an alarm for us. So the idea is the same. If you're going to do some type of validation, if you're going to have a red X, if you're going to have a red, highlight around the box, if you're going to have a message or something like that, it's still, what is the behavior that's going to be either presented to the user, or the reaction or interaction that the user is going to have upon that application.
Yeah, I have to say, like, I think that from a standpoint of things where the user interacts directly, that's all exactly the way I would describe it. But from a standpoint of, would you have test-driven development, I can certainly see that for certain batch processes that you might be doing for importing sales data, things that are really internal to the company and there's nothing external that somebody is going to be seeing. And in those cases, you have to kind of make that switch.
Yeah, that's a true, like performance testing, all test driven, right? Like that's something that is not user interacted. So, I think that's an important comparison and to point out. I didn't even think about that, but you're right. Yes. Yep.
So then going back to my question, we're talking about a combination of both types of development, BDD and TDD?
Sure, but it depends on the environment. You can do both, like in the example that was just presented. I think that's ideal because you're not going to have BDD with your performance testing, right? Like it may not work for that. However, your scenarios for your performance tests may be similar to your BDD scripts as well. Or like what was said, like if you're doing logs, like if you have logs or if you have, any types of batch processing or something like that, TDD probably will work best. And then you may have a mixture. It all depends on your environment. I have not dealt with both in the same place, so I don't know if that works. But if it works for your environment and the people, I think that would be helpful for you guys to choose as a group and a team.
And I also think that TDD is more developer focused, right? So they're focusing on, okay, writing a test and having it fail and it fail until they can make it pass. Whereas the behavior driven development is, like you said, more user focused, user facing. So kind of, if you're thinking like user acceptance testing type world, that's their focus.
Yes, correct. I agree with that.
I have a question. I know like the exercise is like the 3 main goals, but would it be like preferable, or would you say we recommend more like QA, like the QA writing the TDD test out more, just to kind of, I know it's like technical for the developer standpoint, but would it be helpful for a QA team to challenge that effort to kind of see like, hey, we want to see this X, Y, and Z result when we do this?
Yeah, so most organizations that do TDD, they don't have analysts.
Mm-hmm.
They only have test engineers and developers.
Okay.
Right. And usually organizations that have that structure, they probably started out as a startup. And I'm not sure if everyone's familiar, but most startups can't afford all of the different players within a software development environment. So they can usually afford a developer and sometimes a tester. So that's why the rapid processing kind of came about, because all the startups were kind of generating and so are evolving over the last 20 years or so. And so TDD became very important to help these startups be able to deliver quickly and not be able to afford an analyst as well. So yeah, you're right. They mostly do have test engineers and developers. All right, our last question. You want to talk about this a little bit?
Yes. Yes, please.
Awesome. What are your questions? Because in BDD, you can reuse the steps for future use. It depends on the application. I'm not too sure. I think XRay was spoken about before. I'm not sure if XRay can reuse the steps, but like if you're in Cucumber or some of the other tools, they allow you to reuse the steps. Now, in terms of tracing user interface design, you can do that, but you need to have it's not integrated into the applications. Right, so that's a con. And of course, we talked about non-functional requirements. Any questions? Efua, anything you want to add?
Nothing. Yeah, nothing comes to mind right now.
All right.
Oh, I was gonna say the plugin that was brought up, that's clutch because I am in Jira. So thank you. I think Mike dropped off. He's not on the call anymore. I think I'm gonna look into that.
Yeah.
Mike
Cool.
couldn't get his tech to work anyway, so.
Yeah. Definitely gonna look into that.
So any other questions, comments? Okay. I hope this is helpful.
I typed it in the chat earlier, but I know we've talked that, BDD is really kind of more focused when you're talking about the user or when you have a UI. What would you say about doing any sort of BDD if it's primarily like a backend team?
So I would suggest not to do BDD if it's a backend team, kind of like Comcast. They just use TDD, right? Because it's all backend, at least is where we were, right? And then you have your front end team doing their own stuff. But in terms of like search engines, or if you're using something like you're processing a lot of data or doing performance stuff, TDD may be best instead of BDD.
Thanks for the confirmation there.
Yeah.
Basically, if the focus is on people, and people have behaviors that we all have, so that's when it's probably a good candidate to think about BDD. And otherwise, it's a system, and the systems aren't, well, they're just not that interesting. So that would make a lot of sense. So how do you guys think Melissa and Efua did? What do you guys think? Thumbs up? A round of applause?
Great.
Great. Yes,
Oh,
thank
good.
you.
You're welcome.
Now, one of the things that has come up, thank you very much, Melissa and Efua. Now, one of the things that has come up is, how do we get going with BDD? What are some of the ways to start writing the scenarios? If you guys would like, there is a cool product demonstration that we can show you right now, if you have a few moments. Melissa, would you like to, do you have time to show that?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so if you guys want to stick around and take a look at this product demo, it's really quite cool. But thank you very much, Melissa and Efua. It's only taken me years to get you here, and it was well worth the wait.
Yeah, and thanks to everyone for the questions and engaging conversation. It made it fun. Yeah.
Yes, it
It's a fun
Thank
group,
you.
isn't it, Efua? Yeah.
Yeah, you guys are. I'm glad you guys were engaged and really gave good questions and insight. So I appreciate that. So one of the things that, I've been working on for years now is really how to streamline my work as a systems engineer, business analyst, whatever role I'm in, product manager, whatever, right? And so I came up with this tool that basically kind of streamlines the process, at least for me, a little bit. So I would love to hear what the feedback is from folks about this tool, and understanding, what are some of the things that you guys think we could expand on around it, and so on and so forth. So I'm getting ready to log in here. Let me just find my login really quickly. And we'll go from there. So I'll share my screen. Hopefully I don't have too many bugs, but basically it's an application that I'm calling Episteme. And I'll get into what it means a little bit later if we want to talk about that. But the idea is to really do product documentation and generate product documentation. And so if we get started here, I think I'm in test mode. Yeah. So I'll get started here a little bit. I've already created some information here, but I'm going to go over it a little bit, and then I'll show you how it works. So the idea is, we have a grants management system here. I can search our list of epics that we've already created, again, using the noun verb agreement. So submit manager, I don't know, something like that. So if I add this, I can add this to this list, and it's going to add my features for me. So right now it's adding my features. It's adding basically create, audit, view, edit, search, delete. So it's adding all of this information for me right now. And so what it should be doing also is adding some of my scenarios as well. And I think I have a little bug there, but I'll show you another example that where it's going to add my scenarios too. So, you know, I think we talked about, there was a question of, oh, well, how do you create, or how do you know when you need to do a verb or you need to do a epic or feature or user story, and how to break them down and so forth. So I basically just permutated scenarios and epics and features based off of a noun, the verb agreement. So if I start this out from a product perspective, hopefully this works. I think it does. So let's see, because we're still doing some development on it. So if I have product X, or if I use, you know, my product for, let's see if I can do searching or a skills map. I think we were talking about before. So a skills map. And let's say it's for software. This is a skills map. And I'm going to go ahead and create that. So while this is creating, so now you can see it's already creating some of my features for me. So it's creating manage users, all of the basic features that you need in the application, right? Configure security controls, define infrastructure, get reports, access application, migrate data, integrate with external applications, right? So it's creating all my features. It should be creating my scenarios, but it isn't. So there's a bug. I did do some work on it today, so I must have messed up something somehow. So the idea is that as it's creating these particular features, it's also creating my scenario. So I'll go to one that it's already created the scenario so you can see that. So if I go to right here. Yeah, here. So here I've already created these scenarios. So if I go to create users, it's kind of just started me out on some of these scenarios for create users. So create the users, I can audit the users, I can create invalid users, I can audit the users created. So if I'm doing it in bulk. So if I start with create the users, it's going to show me my scenarios, and it's also going to show me a start of my behavioral driven development stuff. So we've created this in order to make it kind of easier for you to kind of start out. Because if you have to write all this information, it's a pain. And the idea is that you'll be able to export this, or like if you're using Jira, you can copy the link and come back here, whatever you want to do, or you can export it and then upload it into some system that you may be working in. So just wanted to kind of show that a bit and you know, get some feedback and thoughts. Like, what do you guys think? Do you think this is something that's useful? It's useful for me because it saves me time.
That's really the name of the game, right? It saves you time and it's
Yeah.
useful for you. I think it's a matter of training other people on how to use it and then getting their feedback for improvement.
Yeah.
This is cool.
But it's very cool. I mean, great job.
I like it.
Yeah, it looks really cool. For me, I work for a larger company, and I suspect that they've got their tools, so you would need to have a way to export this out into the new tool, right? So Jira version 1, something like that.
Yeah.
But that's really neat. That would be great. Like I was saying, for beginners, right? People trying to get into it, it was sort of laid out for them already.
Yep, exactly.
Even if you can export to Excel and then you can do a dump from Excel into Jira, you know what I mean? Because you could do some edits in the Excel sheet, or at least circulate or socialize the Excel sheet to the the business audience and saying, hey, does this meet your criteria, and have them do edits or maybe make suggestions, unless you're going to open this tool up to them and have them participate.
Yeah, these are primarily for, you know, product managers, product owners, business analysts, and so forth. And I mean, it could be helpful for the business owners or, you know, the actual business to review and see how things can be done. And also, it may be good for if someone is working on a proposal and they want to know, well, how many user stories would this take? If I just add in all the verbs and nouns that are associated with this particular project, roughly how much would it cost for us to, not really cost, but what's the scope of it, right? You can kind of scope out things as well.
That's what I like about it.
Yeah.
It gives you a start.
Exactly. Yeah. And then one of the other things that we're going to do, you know, going to the example of the larger products, is we're going to take your data model. We're going to add, well, really your data dictionary. Well, import your data dictionary and generate all this information for you based on your data dictionary, right? One of the other things that we do have in here is being able to, oh, it is associated. Okay. Being able to associate like your NIST requirements with this, so we can add business rules here and so forth. So if you want your NIST requirements, so for example, we're working on like listing out the actual name, because I know everyone doesn't know, you know, the short names, but listing out your NIST requirements. And also right now we have CFRs in here. So being able to associate your CFRs and so forth with this and generating the documentation from here. So adding that information. The other thing is being able to add diagrams. So if you need to sketch something out, you can quickly sketch out, you know, your user story and, you know, show people what you're really talking about and have that discussion for that specific user story and understanding, you know, how this should be associated with just the user story itself and not necessarily the whole feature. And then also relating the user story. So this is already related to another user story. And then the data elements as well. So
maybe you link this to like a mind map or something, if they mind map at that diagram and import that, you know,
yep.
In case if somebody isn't a good drawer.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Looks
a pretty
like
cool
wonderful
concept, actually.
Say that again?
I said, that's a pretty cool concept, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll chime in. I remember using this because Melissa has like really bomb master courses. And I remember using this and I was just thinking, oh my goodness, this like makes it like much easier than what I'm doing currently for our government, like, you know, projects. So super helpful just to have a starting point and to reuse stuff. So
Yeah, I think it could also be very great when you're just trying to figure out how many of us have had to work on bids for government contracts or something of that sort. So this could definitely help, you know, just bring some concept and help you get your arms around that. Everyone, I want to thank you all. Are there any final questions? Or how could someone get more information on BDD? When I looked a few years ago, there was not a whole lot. I think there was one book and it was very light on BDD in general. Where could somebody go to get more resources for this?
Let's see. There are plenty of books on Apple iBooks, I believe. Like there's plenty of books there that have been very helpful. I can't remember the author, but I'll send it to you, Steve, so you can send that out, because I'm not near my phone right now. So, but I would pick it up and because that's really, really helpful. And they describe it in a story format that's really helpful for everyone to kind of get a more understanding about.
Nice.
Yeah, I would say the other places would be also some of the tools that are in the space, like your Cucumber and any of the ones that were listed. They also do a pretty good job of outlining. So.
Okay, that's wonderful. Well, thank you guys so much. All the video recording and the slide deck will be posted on Agile DMV. .org. I will also send it out to the entire list, and it will be posted on LinkedIn as well. So Melissa, Efua, thank you all, and everybody who joined us. Thank you guys so much for joining us. I love seeing you guys here every month. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. It was great. Really
Thank
enjoyed
you.
it. Have a good evening. Thank you.
You too.
Very much.
Thank
Bye,
you,
everyone.
guys.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Hey, Craig, good to see you.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.